people see sort of the finished product and think that, oh, well, I can never be like that. I don't have that dolphin kick or those underwaters, but it made me realize coming back that I didn't have them then either.
Welcome to the award-winning Champions Mojo, hosted by two world record-holding athletes. Be inspired as you listen to Conversations with Champions. And now, your hosts, Kelly Pallas and Maria Parker.
Hello, friends. Welcome to the Champions Mojo podcast. I am your host, Kelly Pallas, and as usual, I am with my co-host, Maria Parker. Hey, Maria.
Hey, Kelly. It's great to be with you here today.
Yes, and Maria, this is a special edition of Champions Mojo from the pool deck, and we have a great interview for you today. It's brief, it's short, but it's powerful.
Yeah, I wasn't there, but I was able to listen to the interview and some great takeaways.
Yeah, we hope you'll stick around and catch the takeaways. And here we go. All right. I am on deck with an on-deck interview after practice at Swim RVA with one of my true heroes that I have been wanting to get on the podcast for so long. Chris Stevenson is a world record-holding master swimmer, national record, zone records, LMSC records. But Chris and I have been friends. We go back all the way to our days when you were at UNC and I was at NC State. We didn't cross over much there, but we do have that little rivalry, but we've been friends. But really, Chris has so many unique things. I don't just admire you, Chris, for all your great swimming, but you have been an unbelievably dedicated volunteer in U.S. Master Swimming and done so much just for me. You are the Virginia, for me, Annalee Matisak. Everybody knows who Annalee is. So you are the Virginia Annalee. You and Heather, your wife, do so much for the sport of swimming. And before we start talking, because there's so much that I want to talk with you about. You are also, we got to get out of here after morning practice because we got to get you. You are a full-time chemistry professor at the University of Richmond, the Spiders. In fact, we're looking over at a sign that says, water may contain spiders here in Richmond, which I love. So, Chris, you've got all these balls in the air. I think the first thing I really want to talk with you about is, you kind of disappeared here recently from the master swimming scene. And that was a disappointment to me personally, because I love to see you swim. I love to see you break records. So tell us where you've been, what's been going on, and why you are now back training.
Right. So, and actually one thing I would say is that I disappeared from the swimming pool, but we still kept on being involved in the volunteer efforts in Virginia just because we feel like we can give back. So I guess what happened is that part of it was sort of personal. Both my parents passed away. And yeah, there was a time when, my mother went first and my dad needed a lot of help. And, you know how all that is too. People our age, we're taking care of our parents. And then I became department chair UR for 6 years. And that was it took a lot of my time. I mean, just put it that way, a lot of my time and energy and emotional energy as well. And so I actually, for a while, I stayed in and swam, although I didn't compete much because I wasn't regular enough, if that makes sense. But then I just couldn't even do that, So for a couple of years, I was basically out of the water. I walked to and from work as to try to get my heart rate up, and that was about all I could manage to do.
Yeah. Did you have any injuries? I would ask people, where's Chris? And I think he's injured.
Right, I did actually. Yes, I had. So what would happen is I would be away for a while, and then I would start back up. And that's probably a recipe, plus getting older, is probably a recipe for injuries as well. But yes, I had shoulder surgery right before COVID hit. So and actually my PT happened during COVID. So that was kind of difficult too. And then, of course, a lot of swim pools were closed down after that. So yes, I did have that to recover from as well, and throwing that into the mix.
Yeah. So now you've been back since June. How is it going, and what does it feel like at this point?
Right. Well, it's been interesting because this is the longest by far that I've been out of the water, and a lot of things you take for granted, your cardiovascular fitness, but also things like your feel for the water. You know how you can tell when someone has a swimming background, when you see lap swimmers or whatever, and when they don't, because of the way they move, the efficiency of their strokes and things like that. Well, you lose some of that in addition to just fitness. I mean, being able to stay underwater, your legs not being strong. So when I first started, probably could barely do 1,000. And so it took a different mindset, right? You're used to, I swam on my own because I didn't want to burden other people with my slowness. You go in and it's like, okay, I'm going to do, 8 100s on such and such. You come up with these ideas and it doesn't survive contact with the water, as they say, right? So
Is that a chemistry term?
No, it's like that. Oh, that war, right? It doesn't survive contact with the enemy, and the water's not your enemy, of course. But you do find yourself like you do a little bit, you get out of breath, you're like, well, maybe I don't need to do 8, I can do 4, or my interval can be, such and such. But what I realized is that I had to sort of scale back expectations and be more realistic, and also I used to, swim and bike and lift, and I realized, okay, just get back to basics. Just take care of the swimming first. Try to get back to where it's enjoyable again. Because that's the other thing is that exercise isn't, when you've been out for a while, you don't get quite that endorphin rush anymore, at least not initially. You get pain. And so you have to kind of overcome that before you start feeling good. And then you start to see the improvement, and that motivates you to go do more and get faster and so forth.
So you did just mention your underwaters. So you are famous in the master swimming community, even decades ago, for being incredible underwater. You were doing these underwaters. Okay, maybe David Burkoff was the originator, but I would say Chris Stevenson was the second. You were the one that has been doing them. How did you get into those amazing underwaters? And also, how are they feeling now at this point?
So yeah, it's interesting you mentioned David Burkoff because he's slightly younger than me. So I've always had good dolphin kick. And I actually remember in high school, one of my first, we lived overseas for a while. We came back and moved to Raleigh, which is where I met you. Actually, and I have to correct you one thing, a little aside. So the first time I ever met you was when I was in high school. I went to an NC State swim camp, and you were one of the, Don Easterling's helpers for that camp. I remember that. So
we didn't get you to come to NC State?
No. The funny thing is, again, sorry for the aside here, but when we first moved to Raleigh, my parents had heard of Don Easterling and tried to get me to swim with him because I think at that time he had some USA swimmers, and I was coming off of a lot of injuries then, and he, at least famously for me, said, no, well, we have girls swimming faster than that. Probably you he was talking about.
Oh, God.
So I was not, and so I was not fast enough to swim at that time to swim for NC State, which changed, shortly afterwards.
Which, boy, he really regretted that one, and you made him regret it.
Anyway, so back to the Burkoff thing. I don't think it wasn't in college when I started. Yes, I took underwaters more than most at the time, but for what was normal at the time, I would take like 3 or 4 underwater kicks, and I would do it on freestyle as well, which was a little unusual at the time, but it wasn't enough to truly take advantage of it. And once Burkoff, I should have put the pieces together. I knew my kick was as fast as my swim, and that's on top of the water. So underwater, you're even faster. But it was probably in masters when I first started working at it. And that's the thing is it is something you have to work at because people see sort of the finished product and think that, oh, well, I can never be like that. I don't have that dolphin kick or those underwaters, but it made me realize coming back that I didn't have them then either. My legs would get tired after 25. I was kicking with a kickboard, so I didn't have to worry about holding my breath. Holding your breath is something that also takes a lot of practice. So my underwaters are better now than they were a couple months ago, that's for sure. And they're probably better than most people's, but they're not where I used to be, so I still have a lot to work on. But that's the thing is that you have to have a plan. Like when you have a set, you say, okay, I'm going to take 6 underwaters off of every wall if you're doing a backstroke or whatever. So there's a definite plan. It's not just doing whatever repeats on whatever intervals. It's how many underwaters to take. Same thing with races. You have to know how hard you can push it early on because otherwise you go into oxygen debt too fast and you can't do it. So yeah, it's definitely something that's very deliberate. But yes, I've always was a good kicker, so I had that kind of natural, I don't know if it's flexibility of ankles and knees or whatever, but I do think it's also something that can be trained and worked on.
Oh, I love that. And this is just the kind of gem that our listeners will benefit from. So if you're talking to kind of an average kicker off the wall, which I'm going to raise my hand here and say that is me. If I can, right now, I can do one dolphin off my walls, one. And I try to do that in practice. What might be a step up thing that I could do to maybe get two?
So I would say that there are two things you have to do. One is you just have to strengthen your legs and core, all right? And that can be out of the water, but also in the water. A lot of people don't believe in kickboards, but I'm not one of those people, so I guess double negative. I do believe in them, and just in the sense of, because sometimes you don't want to have to worry about trying to hold your breath. You just want to strengthen your legs, strengthen your core. And dolphin is different than flutter kick, right? So you have to work on dolphin kick. A lot of people nowadays do dolphin kick on their back on the surface, and I've never liked that because your stronger is your down sweep, when you're facing downwards, right? So your up sweep if you're on your back. And when you're on the surface, you don't have much to push against. If you kick really hard, you just push water up, so you need to either be underwater or with a kickboard. You have to be a little careful if you have shoulder issues with a kickboard, but it does help just to build up strength. So that's one thing. And the other is the breath control. If you do one, go for two next time, that sort of thing. But it has to be something that you're deliberate about. And you have to say, okay, I'm not going to worry about my time. I'm going to do this set of whatever. And my main goal is to do 2 or 3 or whatever dolphin kicks off of every wall and to make them count. Because that's another thing, is a lot of times kicking sets are a recovery set, an afterthought for a lot of people. And actually, I got this, some summers I've swum with the UR coach, Matt Barroney. And one thing that he did that, you're still learning even at our age, right? Yeah. One thing he did that I thought was interesting. Well, 2 things. One is he often had warm-ups as a hard kick set, and not just a rinky-dink kick set, but where you're really pushing yourself. You're trying to do good times or tough repeats or whatever. And then the other thing is sometimes the main set is a kick set. Don't do it after the main set. Do it as your first main set. And look at your times and try to make them get faster, because if you don't have a good kick, you're not going to have good underwaters, right? That's just the way it is. You have to have good breath control, but you have to have a fast kick.
Oh, I'm loving this. This is just like you're talking to the person that needs it, and I know a lot of our listeners will. So you've been back in the water since June. We established that. What are some of your goals coming up, and how are you planning to deal with this time out of the water, and what might be ahead?
Well, it's going to be a challenge in the sense that I'll eventually go back to a meet, probably next winter or spring, and it'll be a challenge because I'll be slow, right? Even if I'm in good shape, if I'm happy with my shape, it'll have been, 8-10 years since I last competed seriously, so even if I had swum that whole time, I would have been slower. So that'll be a challenge, right? The clock doesn't lie, and so it's kind of hard, right? And there's the other saying, it's like the older we get, the faster we were, so you kind of misremember how fast you were and forget the struggles, so. Yeah. But I guess you just have to push forward. It's nice to have something to shoot for. I spent a couple months on my own, like I said, but now I'm swimming with a group, and that's good too, because they push you, and plus you get the social interactions, and you can forget how badly you're hurting if you have someone to joke about with it. So.
Yes. Well, yeah, as we have established on the podcast, the Swim RVA Masters group, this morning group, they're beasts. They're young, they're fast, and you are already at the front of a lane and doing really well. Is there anything that you might be ahead of where you thought you were?
I don't know. I'm a pretty harsh critic of myself, so I guess it doesn't hurt as much as I thought, but mostly I see the places where I'm missing. Like on Friday, we had to do some fast swimming, and I was slower than I wanted to be, so, and I wouldn't say I'm at the front of the lane. I'm in the fastest lanes, but there are still people who are quite a bit faster than me, especially on the sprint part, which I have not gotten. One of the things you lose when you get older is the ability to get your heart rate way up there, right? So the difference between my hold this pace for a while and my all-out speed is much less than I would like it to be. And so that's why I'm a little worried about racing, because I'm like, oh, that's not much faster than I go in practice. But I guess my underwaters and my breath control is better than I expected it to be at this point, but I still have a ways to go.
And is it as fun as you remember it?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
the last question, which is just, is there anything that I have not asked you that you might want to share with our listeners about anything? Master swimming, chemistry?
I guess both chemistry and master swimming, they can be intimidating for people from a distance, from the outside, but it's not. I mean, there's always something that's your speed. You can show up at a group. It's nice to have people to swim with and have someone else tell you what to do rather than come up with your own workouts. But yeah, just give it a try. You'll find someone your speed and people to talk to. So before you know it, the hour's gone and you had a good workout.
And how can you make me like chemistry, Chris?
I guess I've always liked things based on what they can explain or what they can do for you. So chemistry is the essential science, as they say, right? Everything around us is matter. So why things behave the way they do. It's interesting to know how the world works, including chemistry.
I love it. Thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure.
Stay tuned for the takeaways. Want to succeed like a champion? 5-time Olympic coach Bob Bowman, coach of Olympic legend Michael Phelps, says Kelly's book, Take Your Mark, Lead, is a powerful addition to your personal improvement library, and learners from all walks of life will gain key insights and enjoy this inspiring book. Take Your Mark, Lead debuted as an Amazon #1 bestseller in 5 categories and is available online. And now, the takeaways.
Okay, here are the takeaways. And Maria, Chris Stevenson, what a champion. What a joy it was to catch up with Chris. And what was your first takeaway?
Yeah, it was a great on-deck interview. My first takeaway is, as always, it's never too late to come back, no matter what. Life takes you away from swimming sometimes, but you can always get back to it. And importantly, he said, we think it's harder when we're older, but he reminds us it was hard when we were young. It takes work to get good, and it wasn't easy then, and it's not easy now. You just got to put the work in.
Yeah, that we always think we were faster when we were younger, and we get faster as we get.
Right.
But when we look back, we think things were easier and that we were faster. That was a great point. Yes. My takeaway that I'm going to share here is that kicking is so important, and yet we swimmers often relegate it to the bottom of the workout or the last thing that we do instead of making it a main set. I love that takeaway. I also loved that while Chris is known for being kind of this natural kicker, he says that he's not. He says that he works hard at it. He prioritizes it. He really studies it. And so he says, yeah, we can all become good kickers. And I think with anything, we just need to focus on whatever we want to bring about. We just have to focus on kicking if we want to be better kickers. So it was a great interview. And Maria, thanks so much. Another great one in the books. Love you.
Love you, Kelly.
Thank you for listening to the Champions Mojo podcast. Did you enjoy the show? We'd be grateful if you would leave us a 5-star review on iTunes to help others find us. And we'd also love to hear from you. We're on all social media platforms, or you can reach us at championsmojo.com.